All right. Well, Grace Hill Church and other friends, hope you guys are doing well today. Hoping you guys can maybe take a quick lunch break and hang out with us for about 30 minutes. This is our Question of the Week YouTube show and podcast. That's what we're calling it. And really excited for today because we have a special guest.
Joe Carter.
There
he is.
So if you have been around Grace Hill for a long time, you know exactly who Joe Carter is. He helped us plant our church, used to serve as an elder at our church.
Was at Grace Hill before I was.
That's true. Yeah. I mean, he was at Grace Hill before there was Grace Hill. Mm-hmm. Helped us launch the church and has since become, correct me if I'm wrong, the executive pastor at McLean Bible Church, Arlington campus.
That's right.
With Eric Saunders. Yeah.
Yep.
Eric's preached at Grace Hill.
He's a good friend of ours. And so if you're newer to Grace Hill, you don't know Joe, well, this is Joe.
Yeah. I miss everybody. It's been...
we miss you, man.
Yeah. We need to have you come in and preach sometime.
I don't know.
We do.
Oh, yeah, we should do it.
Yeah.
We should do it. But yeah, it's really glad you're here. Thanks for coming by and miss you. And I know everyone's going to be excited to see you. And then Nick Jones. Hey, Nick. How you doing? You're always here.
Old Nick. Always here. Can't get rid of me.
So let's jump right in to the question. And there's a reason we asked you to come too, Joe, not just because we miss you and you could contribute to any of one of these that we do, but also because I feel like your background and your career, you have some specific expertise in this. So the question that we're going to ask today is, where should Christians get their news? All right. Now, pretty relevant question given the kind of journalistic landscape that we're living in. And
just how media saturated we are as a people,
absolutely.
Whether we want to be or not.
And there's so much news coming at us. Yeah. There's so much commentary coming at us about all kinds of different topics. Mm-hmm. And as Christians, we want to be people of the truth. And we want to be sober-minded, and we want to be able to react to the news in ways that are honoring to God. But having the correct news is pretty important, I think, to that process. And I think because we have so much opinion and commentary coming at us as well, it's creating a lot of division within the church. Mm-hmm. Because what if people within the church have a different perspective or position on what the truth or the news actually is? Mm-hmm. So Joe, real quick, you're a former journalist, or would you still consider yourself a journalist?
I used to own a small little newspaper in Texas, and then I became a sort of opinion journalist, sort of. And I still write for the Gospel Coalition, doing the current events. So yeah.
Yeah, so one of the things do you still do ERLC, or are you off that?
Off ERLC.
Okay. So, so one of the things you do, and I know one of the things you're more known for is your 9 things that you need to know about blank, where you'll take a topic that, and I think most of the time there are topics that culture's talking about, and say, hey, here are just 9 things, straight facts you need to know. I think you do a great job at, hey, no commentary, or if you do put some commentary in, you'll say, hey, this is what I think, but just helping people. I've always really appreciated your FAQs on things because I think you do a great job at taking what we need to know, making it concise, so people like me who don't want to read for a really long time can read something
very helpful,
and
man.
get a quick,
Synopsis,
snapshot of what's going on. Yeah. So, and I think for you to do that and provide that service for the church, you have to read a lot. And you have to go to a lot of sources to get that information, right?
Yeah, unfortunately I do. Because I really hate the news. I hate current events. I'd rather not think about that stuff at all.
I'm with you, brother, man.
So, I mean, if you're putting together a FAQ article, I mean, how many different news sources do you think you're going to compile that information?
It depends on the topic. I usually try to at least get 10 to a dozen just to make sure that I'm not missing any nuances that you get from just, if you focus just on 1 or 2 news sources, you tend to miss some nuances that matter for the story.
Sure. So you're like grabbing different perspectives. Yeah. Well, let's start here. So, Joe, could help us understand kind of the current journalistic landscape that we're in today, and really even how that has evolved from really 20, 30 years ago, I mean, I know 20, 30 years ago, it was a literal 24-hour news cycle. And, now they say it's really a 24-second news cycle now, or something to that effect. Help us to understand what's kind of the current journalistic landscape out there.
Well, the news, and when we talk about news, I think we're talking about current events that are for public consumption that are delivered by the media industry. And that last part is very important because the media industry constitutes all the sources that get that sell two products. The first product is news content. That's the content they sell to you and me. That's the stories, the news stories, the stuff on the TV. But they're also selling your attention to advertisers.
Right. You are the product.
So you are the product, and you are the customer for the product. So they have to balance that too. And it used to be back in the days, probably from say with the 1950s and the 1980s, before CNN came along, news usually came along twice a day. If your newspaper, you may have got a morning and evening newspaper, but so maybe twice a day, but usually once a day.
Or a radio broadcast.
Radio broadcast.
Yeah, Walter Cronkite in the evening.
Yeah, Walter Cronkite once in the evening. So you would come home, you'd watch 30 minutes of local news, 30 minutes of national news, and that would be it till the next morning. And then CNN came along and kind of made it possible to have news constantly.
And that was 1980, did they start?
1980, 80,
was it 80 or 90?
Like that. It was in the early 80s.
Yeah, okay.
I believe. And that changed because it not only changed the content, because before the content used to be the important side of it. The customers you were selling to advertisers was important, but journalists really consider themselves important because a key function of the news was agenda setting. And it used to be the New York Times was the top newspaper in America. They would set the agenda for what Walter Cronkite would talk about at 5 o'clock.
Oh, okay.
And so it was a trickle-down effect. So the journalists consider themselves very important. You get in this role because you want to set the agenda for what people talk about.
Sure.
Now, that's still an important role, but it's kind of dispersed a little bit. But so what happened, though, is when the news cycle sped up, they weren't just selling you the content. They were selling you change, that you had to know this news. By 5 o'clock in the evening, the news cycle had to change so much because you can't sell the same product to people all day long.
Sure.
You need to anybody's ever watched CNN headline news, you watch it one time a day, you don't need to watch it again because that's the same stuff. So they had to change it up constantly.
Yeah.
So what happens was news became about change and not about the information.
Gotcha.
So it became about the process rather than the
Interesting. The actual product.
And you would say that's kind of one of the main outcomes of cable news, of this kind of constant news flow, is we can't just say the same thing every 30 minutes all day, every day.
Absolutely. And there's two things. The one was a shift from the print media to the TV media. Now, if you watch a 30-minute cable news show, you're getting less information than you get on the front page of a newspaper. So in just pure content, you're getting less because it's all filler, some other stuff.
Right. There's a time element there. They just can't.
They can't. But also they have to show you these images to keep you. So what happens is it used to be, there was an old saying, if it bleeds, it leads. If there's a car wreck or some violent crime or something like that, that would get more attention because that captures attention. There's pictures.
Right. Those images grabbed you.
Something about the local city council meeting, that image showing that it's not going to keep your
but that might have more impact on your everyday life.
It's true.
Yes, exactly.
Which is
right. And hopefully we'll talk about that later about why that matters more. But there was a running joke for a while there about young white girls missing would get the news because you could always show her a picture, show her friends, or show that kind of things, or missing airlines, things like that. They would talk about that way out of proportion to what the importance was.
Which already begins to show you the agenda of not necessarily putting forward the most important things, but drawing viewership.
And that's a great point because it used to be the agenda was set by people who had high ideals about what, it may be a liberal or conservative, but they wanted the agenda to get across because they thought it was important. And now the agenda was like, how do we keep these people attention?
Yeah. Because
the agenda was originally focused on getting the people's attention, the content, and now it's about keeping these for the advertisers.
Right.
And I would say the ones who really came up were genius about this was Fox News. Fox News was the first one to really understand that the content doesn't really matter. What matters is the audience. You tell the audience what they want to hear, make them because people assume that Fox News came about because there was and it did come about because there was an underserved market, and that was conservative viewers.
Because they mostly were existing in kind of the radio sphere. I know conservatives kind of held that. Yeah.
Yeah. That
So
would
not
be
on
this
the
thing
TV.
called the fairness doctrine, where you had to present both sides all the time.
Yeah.
And when that was taken away, then conservative radio kind of because the both sides issue always seemed to favor what the political left, because the people who usually got into journalism were from the political left. And so if you watched the evening news, even if you was a conservative, you disagreed with it, that was the only choice. And Fox News thought, well, we can create a new news agency to serve these people. But what they realized is that's not important. You could serve these people, you could tell, because they were already getting the news somewhere else. What was valuable was you had a new audience to sell to advertisers.
Right.
And selling a
Untapped
product
market, yeah.
Untapped market. Like, for example, like it's kind of a running joke now since the 80s about gold, like commercials about gold. You see that on Fox all the time. You never saw that anywhere else because that's such a narrow niche audience.
Yeah.
Usually older people, conservative. And so Fox knew that you had a new audience to sell. And that created a real split within Fox itself. I mean, even recently, you would have the Fox News side saying one thing at 3 o'clock. At 5 o'clock, the opinion people would say something completely different. And they would even talk about how talking about each other, like, Fox News.
Yeah, I remember there was the whole rift between like Tucker Carlson and Shepard Smith, right?
Exactly.
Hard news versus the opinion. But is that kind of why opinion came out, not just in conservative media, but also in liberal media? Like, did opinion start to really dominate, especially primetime hours, because that was feeding their audience what they already wanted to hear? Is that kind of why that came about, opinion news?
Well, part of it is journalism has always been biased. There's no way you can take bias out of journalism. Like, even when I talk about those 9 things to do, I set the agenda of what I'm going to write about.
Sure.
So I'm having the agenda-setting function. Then I choose what's going to be put in there. Out of the 9 things, people always ask me, why don't you have the 10 things? Oh, I can't think of the 10th thing. The reality is, these are the 9 things that interest me. So there's a bias already implicit into the. But
Sure.
it used to be that you had to hide that. You had to pretend like you were unbiased. And nobody was really fooled until you could see, okay, well, here's the bias, a liberal bias that we see on, say, NBC News. And then you have Fox News that are pretty blatant about their bias.
Sure.
So would you say now it's more of a badge of honor?
Now it's that nobody cares. Nobody expects you to pretend.
Yeah.
So there's very few places that will say, I have to be unbiased news source.
So let me throw this question out
Which sounds
there.
troubling to me, but maybe it's not.
Well, I mean, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to watch, especially cable news, and say, oh, wow, these people are clearly, I used to joke with the guys all the time. I mean, especially when Trump was in office, you went to CNN.com, the headline was going to be something negative about Trump. You know what I mean? It's just constant. And so here's my question. So, all right, let's take the election. And obviously, after the election, there was a lot of questions. There was a lot of rhetoric around if this was a fair election or not. Okay. Right. And so, of course, Americans need to discern what they think about the outcome of this election. And the news outlets that clearly favored the election of President Biden were saying it's crazy to think that this was that there was any question about the results of the election. And obviously the news outlets who favored President Trump were airing a lot of time on questions about the election. And so I could see Christians and just Americans going, okay, how do I think rightly about this? Because I know that these news outlets want President Biden to win. That's obvious. So they're not going to question the results of the election. I know this news outlet wants President Trump to win. So of course they're going to question the results.
Right.
How do you cut through all that? I mean, is it just how do you go in there and say, well, I don't want to be swept away by sensationalized media, but I also want to be sober-minded and, okay, well, if there are questions about the election, does that make sense? So how would you cut through that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's this case presents a great opportunity to talk about this because both sides, you have what we'll call the liberal media and conservative media.
Sure.
They were both trying to serve their audience. So their audience wanted different messages. But we have a great natural experiment here because it trickled out of the news media into the courts. And in the courts, you can't just say your opinion. You have to present some facts. You have to have evidence. And so what was being talked about on the news media and what was being presented in the courts was completely different.
And
so,
would you say on both sides?
No, I would say it's pretty clear that, I mean, this is one side that it's pretty obvious now that on cable news you would hear that the election was stolen, these voting machines don't work, and then you would go on the courts and you can't prove that because you can't say that because there's consequences to that are not held. And so what happened was we could see, obviously, these people were just straight up lying to us because that's what, and here's the thing, we want to be lied to. The reason we want certain, I mean, I'm a conservative, I like conservative news sources because part of me just wants to be lied to. But I don't want to know the truth. I don't want to face reality.
Yeah, they help reinforce what you already think.
Right, exactly. They reinforce what I want to think. And so, but they did that to such an extreme that it got to the point where people really started to believe in this, even though they knew this. I mean, one good example is like Newsmax had to run a disclaimer once they were sued for lying about the voting machines. They had to run a disclaimer, say, okay, we knew this wasn't true, yet we said it anyway.
Sure.
Yeah.
And yet the audience is like, I don't care. I know it's, I'm still going to believe what I want to believe.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, that was a good example of what happens on the conservative side, but it happens on the liberal side too. We just don't we don't see the outcome as clearly because it doesn't reach the courts it doesn't reach the point where we have to face the truth about the situation.
Sure.
So that really kind of shows that embedded in the media is a natural tendency to tell you what you want to hear and tell your audience specifically what you want to hear. It used to be, and the reason we're seeing more of this, when Walter Cronkite was there, he had a bias, he had all this kind of stuff, but he also had to keep both sides of the audience happy. And now when the audience is split and becoming niche audiences, it's much easier to tell people what they want to hear, even if you know it's not true, because you don't really care about the truth. You care about the audience.
Which feels like it's sad because it seems like there almost can't be a centralized mediating outlet or position like a Walter Cronkite. It has to go into one of the extremes because that's where broader culture is taking it.
Absolutely, and that's unfortunate that's because news is no longer news anymore. It's about entertainment. News should be something actionable, something you can act on. There's a reason why you need to know this.
Right.
And I think, Joe, that's a great point. I mean, one of the things I remember hearing, I don't remember, maybe it was talking to you, maybe I read an article, but about how cable news, and even not just cable news, but even radio shows, whatever, for the most part now, they are not news outlets. They are news entertainment shows.
Yes.
And yet we still view them through the lenses. No, this is a news outlet when it's not. And so that's the problem.
Yeah, every 15 minutes they have breaking news, the intense music comes on, the graphic flashes across the screen, breaking news, you would not believe what happened.
It is
something
a show.
About Prince Harry or something, and it's like and so they always have to grab and I think just want to reiterate it is on the liberal and on the conservative side. Both are fully equally guilty of that across the board.
One other question I had, and we can get to this a little later, but one of the things I think might be helpful is I remember a few years ago I researched what are some of the most non-biased, reliable news sources, and most of them, I think the Economist kept popping up at the top of the list, but most of them are news sources that you have to pay for.
Right.
So even I don't know. Is there a way around that? That might not be quite as relevant.
Well, yeah, I want to get to that. That question
sure.
Hey, what are some actually good sources that we could go to? But I want to bring in social media real quick to this conversation because, obviously we had the evolution of cable news, but all right, social media now is this massive new player when it comes to it, and
fuel on the fire, man. And
so, Joe, tell me, is this true or false? What I'm about to say, all right, is this that social media, no matter what the platform is, Twitter, Facebook, they have algorithms that are designed to take what you click on and then feed you content that agree with that or are associated with that, so that you get driven into an echo chamber, because then in that echo chamber they can target ads to you that you're more likely to click on, and therefore it drives the revenue. Is that a fair representation of how social media feeds you content?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. But I mean, I think in fairness to them, they would say what they're doing is they're giving you what you want.
Right.
They're feeding you.
They're helping you find more of your.
You're already interested in this, so it's like with Netflix. I like this movie. You'll like this movie too.
Sure. Here are some suggestions.
So the algorithm is they consider it neutral, but the problem is, as we've seen, is that it leads you down a path to people start questioning things, and you start ending up in an anti-Semitic material or things about racist or things like that.
It gets you more extreme.
Yeah.
It leads to more extreme because eventually the funnel narrows down to what everybody's talking about this one thing. Well, it kind of narrows down to people talking about it in a different way. That's where the more extreme comes because you can't just show the same person. Okay, here's a CNN clip about this. Here's a Fox News clip about that.
Because there's not a governor on them wanting you to click and to make money off of that. They want to send you further down the rabbit hole.
Right.
Which is what the social dilemma, that documentary, is all about.
Yeah, exactly. And it's just the whole purpose is to keep you on there longer.
Yeah.
To keep you in the hole where you're just staring at the computer.
And maybe that's why we're seeing an acceleration in our culture of conspiracy theories on the right and left, of more extreme views, and maybe even seeing like the riots over the summer, how those got extreme, the riot at the Capitol, how that got extreme. Like all of these movements, would you say social media is a contributing factor here? It almost seems like these things are going from 0 to 60 way faster than they used to. Is that fair or?
Absolutely. And one of the reasons why is because we spend so much time on this. Like back when I was a kid, if you was in the JFK conspiracy stuff, you had to go buy some books or you had to really
you had to invest in this.
Yeah. Now you're standing in line at Whole Foods and you're scrolling through looking some information.
That's a great point.
I mean, you're spending your whole day involved in this kind of stuff rather than just, again, with the news, you come home at night, you get an hour of news. If you're really interested in the news, you spend an hour.
Right.
Now you can, we have people that go home, turn on the TV, and watch the news till the next day.
Sure.
Until they go to bed.
Right.
It's just insane.
So, let's get to that practical side then. What advice would you have for Christians out there when it comes to how to consume the news, and maybe even down to some specific suggestions on sources to go to ensure that, we are being sober-minded, but we, because we do think it's good for Christians to be engaged in our society and culture and to know what's going on. What advice would you have?
Well, the first thing we'd do is consume less news.
Okay.
There's way too much time spent on the news. I mean, I have Christians that in my church and that I know that they have a hard time spending 15 minutes reading their Bible.
Yeah.
Yet they can spend an hour watching or scrolling through Twitter.
Right.
News
Right.
Yeah.
If God's word is more important than the news, we need to spend more time on that. So first of all, just cut out the news.
What are you feeding yourself?
And if you have an iPhone, it has a great new feature called Screen Time that will tell you exactly what you're doing.
Dude, because on the iPhone, you swipe left to the search thing, and all the news articles are right there.
Yeah. So,
so cut down the news. Cut out. Make the shift from national to hyper-local news. It used to be the other way around. It used to be the news you really cared about was what was going on in your area. And now we've shifted that. We care about the national news. We don't even know who our mayor is anymore. We don't know what's going on in city council. So things like, like the coronavirus story is an important story. What's really important is what's going on in your local neighborhood.
Right.
How are the vaccines coming there, things like that. So focus on the more local, the better, because the more actionable, the better.
That's
good. That's great advice.
That's really helpful because, I get a free newspaper. It feels like every day. The Fairfax Times on my driveway, and I just always pick it up and throw it straight in my recycling bin.
Good kindling right there.
Right? Yeah, it's for the solo stove. But so that's actually great.
That doesn't affect our blood pressure. That doesn't get us exercise.
Right. But there probably is some very relevant information to my neighborhood and my community.
Absolutely. There's for example, there's a story today about a young Loudoun man who was in a fraternity that got hazed and died.
Oh man!
Or in Loudoun County, so it's it's local to our area. That
absolutely.
So finding ways to attach the important news stories of the day to our localness can show us how to change.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay. So less news, more Bible.
More Bible.
That's a good one.
Yeah. Seriously.
But hyper local.
Hyper-local. Now, as far as discerning what outlets to go to, there's two kind of filters I use. The first one is kind of move toward the sources that have a bias against you.
Okay.
Because if I'm watching a conservative news outlet, I have my shields down.
Yeah,
I don't have my guard up. So they're going to tell me something, I'm going to believe it. If I'm in what's a more politically liberal outlet, I'm like, okay, where's the bias? I'm looking for the bias.
Right.
Your critical eye is
exactly.
on.
I'm really critical about the engagement with it. So I'm engaging. I'm not just a passive reader of this. I'm engaging it more. But also, and here's a big one. Go toward the one that has the most to lose. especially in credibility. Like people bash the New York Times liberal. Absolutely, New York Times is liberal, is biased. But if they are absolutely wrong, they have a much higher price to pay than OAN News or Newsmax, who's just an upstart who just really doesn't care. I mean,
Sure.
it's not,
Sure.
so even if people are biased against you, if they have something to lose by lying to you, you tend to trust them more on that. But generally, don't trust the news to know what they're talking about in general.
Yeah.
Michael Crichton, the novelist, he used to talk about, I think it's called
Used to read a lot of his
the
books.
Dunning effect, where he said he would read something in the newspaper and know because of his knowledge, because he was a doctor. He's like, I know that can't be true. And then he would flip over a couple of pages like, oh, well, that must be true. He's like, well, why do I not trust the newspaper on the stuff I know about and assume that they know about stuff that I don't know about?
Sure.
So just have less credibility, and not saying like we should be skeptical, because sometimes facts change, the situation changed. Like I remember when the coronavirus first came out, they said don't wear a mask, or don't bother with mask. It doesn't matter.
And that was the CDC.
Yeah, it was the CDC.
Okay, yeah.
That was, but some other research came out that changed that.
Sure.
But people say, well, they were wrong about that, so we can dismiss them about that. We really have to be more critical in examining and going with the best evidence. And that's something else that we have to base our information on evidence. As Christians, we can't just say, I want to believe this, therefore it's true.
Right.
And I would say probably 90% of what we agree with about the news is because it fits what we want to know. It fits what we want to hear.
Right.
And so,
yeah. Do you have any recommended sources?
Actual outlets?
Actually, Nick, your question was really good because I've noticed the same thing. Some of the news sources that I want to read as well do require subscription. Like you have to pay for it,
which might be worth it.
Well, it kind of makes me think, hey, their revenue stream is less targeting ads at you. Maybe they have that a little bit, you know what I mean? But it is more, hey, if you want this service, you're gonna have to pay for it.
Yeah,
that's true. I mean, because like I said, there's always the consumer and the content, the model. The subscription models, they're selling you the content, so they're hoping you find the material trustworthy and relevant, informational.
Yeah, which keeps you coming back.
Yeah, they're not selling you to advertisers as much.
Yeah. Right.
When I was in the newspaper business, it was all about the car ads. You were selling. The news was there to sell car ads. It wasn't the other way around.
Wow.
And so, but we sold that paper for a quarter. I mean, it's just pretty much giving them away.
Right.
So the more they make you pay for it, you at least knowing it's probably more on the content than you're the consumer.
Sure. Yeah. Absolutely.
But of course, nobody wants to pay for news. It's information wants to be free, and so we. But I would say a good way to know is again go back to the credibility. What kind of credibility I have to lose, but also look for sources who don't care about that issue, or not say don't care, but they don't have as much stake in it. For example, if I'm like really interested in politics or something like that, I usually turn to the BBC because their take on
it's from another place.
Yeah, it's from another place.
I have their app too.
Skin in the game that maybe a new American news outlet would have.
Sure.
Like that.
Sure.
And they're hyper global in focus.
Yeah, exactly.
There's pros and cons with that.
Yeah.
But.
Gotcha. Well, and if you read the New York Times, maybe obviously they would favor, President Biden in the election or something like that. So maybe understand that bias when you're reading news about the election. But if they're reporting on the wildfires in California or something, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
There's less chance that, they're not, I don't know, maybe they have an agenda with climate change or something like that. But you know what I'm saying? So.
Yeah.
And we really need to ask why we care about this. Like, why are we reading this news story about politics? Because we want to hear if our side's winning or our side's losing.
Sure.
Or which side's gaining status, which side's losing status.
Right.
And the liberal papers, the Democrats gain the status, the Republicans lose status, and otherwise vice versa. Because we tend to put ourselves in this. We're like, this is our side, therefore, it's kind of like an honor-shame culture where they're shaming us by criticizing our political party.
Right.
And so that's why we turn against, if a news source is criticizing our political party or criticizing our side, they're shaming us. We take it very personally.
Because it's your beliefs, right? These are your closely held beliefs.
Yeah.
And so that's the string that they attach you to this. And that's how they get you in. Because and it's true, but it doesn't also, and now for us as the church, it doesn't have to be divisive.
And I think it just goes back to your first piece of advice, Joe. If we would consume more of God's word,
absolutely,
than the news,
Amen.
I think we would be more sober-minded on these things. I think these things would have less emotional implications in our lives.
Yes.
You know what I mean? Up or down or whatever.
Because this isn't our ultimate home.
Yeah.
Right.
And also, you know, the local aspect matters a lot. I mean, when I was when I had a newspaper in Texas, I would go and I would talk to these Democrat Republican local officials, and I would ask them about national news. And like, I don't care about that. I became a politician to focus on this little hyper local issue.
Yeah.
Because when in reality, the parties didn't make that much difference then, because they all care about the same thing. And I think it's the same thing in our church. When we care about national stuff, it's what happens to trickle down to our schools and our local parks and things like that.
Right.
We can be more united on that, because those aren't issues that separate its devices. So, spend more time in God's Word, spend less time on national news, focus on what you have in common with somebody in the pew with you. And I think it's and also there's no need to talk about news with everybody. I mean, it's it's weird thing that I got sucked into, that you have a social media feed. People want to know what you're thinking all the time.
Right.
They really don't. And I started Twitter.
Social media tells you that they do, but they don't.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
I started Twitter in 2007, so like 14 years. It's nothing good's ever come of it. I mean, literally nothing
we've
good. I
talked
can't
about
say
that,
like,
yeah.
hey, I got a job because of my social media.
Or somebody
feed.
came to know the Lord. Yeah,
Exactly.
Sure.
It's just,
But it's easy to, or you might get to that point where you go, hey, I lost my job because of my social media
I know
feed.
so many people that lost their jobs.
Right.
I don't know how many times my boss has called me up. It's like, hey, maybe you need to take that down. It's like, it's just, so it's, we need to, because one of the things I've started doing recently is as soon as I wake up in the morning, I read Proverbs. I read a chapter of Proverbs. And it's so much harder to go on social media after the Bible's telling you, keep your mouth shut.
Here's some wisdom. Yes. Yeah.
The next thing you do,
that is a good word.
open up social media. It's like, maybe I'll skip it today.
Sure. This doesn't seem wise after reading Proverbs. That's actually a really good piece
That
of
is.
advice.
Joe, this is great, man. Good
you
stuff.
should read a chapter of Proverbs before you tweet.
Yeah.
That's a good rule of thumb.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah, well, Joe, thanks so much. I think that's really helpful, and I hope all of you felt that conversation was helpful. So thanks for coming in.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me over.
Appreciate it. Any last word before we cut it off? Either of you guys, or
No.
Felt like where we ended it was good?
Yeah, I think so.
All right, read a chapter of Proverbs.
Yeah.
Before you engage online. So thanks so much for tuning in, and next week, I think, hopefully, we had to reschedule it, but my buddy Cam Triggs will be in, and we're going to talk about the hot button issue of justice. So that's a big issue in the church. Excited. He's a really great, faithful brother. I think he'll have some awesome things to say on that. But anyway, thanks for tuning in. Join us this Sunday, 10 a.m. We'll be on Facebook and YouTube, all the places. Thank you, social media, for you guys to tune in. So we hope that we'll see you there. All right. See you guys later.